Hey there, this is Anthony from mycodeteacher.com. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to create a basic SQLite application. So what we'll do is we're going to make an application that stores a user's friends. So we'll have an ID for each friend, a name and a phone number, and then we'll allow the user to add some friends, and clicking on it or selecting a friend from a table view that we'll create will pull some information up from the friend. And the key point here is that this will all be done with SQL. So we'll save the friends and each friend's information in an SQL database. Alright, so of course we have Xcode open, so we're going to make a new project. We're going to go with a navigation based here. Not so much for the navigation controller, but for the fact that when you choose navigation based, it comes already with a root view controller, which is a UI table view controller, and we want to use table view here, so we'll save some time by allowing Xcode to already create the table view for us. So I'm just going to call this light. Now the very first thing we want to do here is add the SQLite library. So if you see here, we go to frameworks. The defaults here are Core Graphics, Foundation, and UI Kit. But of course, we're going to need the SQLite library. So to add the framework, I'm going to go to Action, Add, Existing Frameworks. Now if I drop this down here, you can see that the SQLite library isn't here. So I'm going to search for libsql, and I'm just going to add the first one here. And you can see now I've got the SQLite library 3.0 version added to my frameworks here. The next thing I want to do is I want to open the lite.delegate.h file and import the SQLite library. So by default, of course, this is not here, so I'm going to use a simple import statement, much like you would with any other framework. Import SQLite 3.h in brackets and save this. So now I've imported this into my file, my lite.delegate.h file. Now I can use the SQLite library. Now what I need to do is I need to create the actual SQL database for use in the application. So I'm going to use Terminal to do this. There are a lot of applications with user interfaces, GUIs, for managing and creating SQLite databases, but I'm going to use the terminal here since creating one is actually really simple. It only takes a few lines. So to start off, I'm going to move the directory to the desktop. So when I create it, it'll save to the desktop. And now I'm going to type SQLite3 friends.sql. And now you can see I've entered into the SQLite console, and I'm going to use this to create the friends table. So if you're familiar with MySQL, which to understand this you probably have to be, or at least familiar with some sort of SQL, this probably looks very familiar to you. So I'm going to simply type in the code like you would with MySQL or any other SQL language and create the table manually. So create table friends, and then I'm going to have three fields here. The first is going to be called ID, and that's going to be an integer and the primary key of each row. So we're not going to have much use for the primary key here in this application, but when you have something like a friends table or any table where each row needs to have some unique identifier, it's definitely good to just make that the primary key and use an integer and call that field the ID. The next, I'm going to call name, and I'm going to make that a varchar field, and I'm going to make that 30 characters in length. And last, I'm going to make a phone number field, also varchar, and I'm going to make that 11. Just in case when users create the add some friends, in case they add 1 in front of the area code, which would make it an 11-digit phone number. Alright. Now I'm gonna insert a test row, so when we read from the database, it's not empty, so we don't have to wait until we've created the insert code to see if it actually worked. So insert into friends name, phone number, values Anthony Frizzalone. I'm gonna use my name and a random number here. So 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 0. Alright, now I'm gonna quit and close this, and our friends table should be complete. So now I'm going to drag this and add this into my resources here. So now I've added my friends table in the form of SQLite file to my Xcode project. So now I can actually use that as a database. So now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to set it up so that when the application runs for the first time, it's going to, or actually every time the application runs, it's going to check to see if the friends table has been copied over to the user's documents directory of the application. And so that way we won't actually modify the original copy of the friends SQL table. That'll kind of be a template. So if something were to go wrong, we would still have the original copy, the structure of the friends table, and we could go back to that. So again, we're gonna create a method here that will check to see if the friends.sql file has been copied to the documents directory of the application for each individual user on their iPhone. If not, make a copy. If so, read from that copy. Okay, so we need a few instance variables here, specifically one for the name of the database and one for the path of the database. Alright, so let's add that underneath here. NSString DB path and NSString DB name. So we'll only need to set these each once at the start of the application. So let's do that in the application did finish launching method, right before the window takes a sub view and becomes visible. So first, let's set the name of the database. DB name is equal to friends.sql, and that's always going to be true, of course. Now, we're going to, like you would in any application that you use the documents directory of the application, we need to use a few functions here to search for the documents directory and then find the correct one. So this is some obligatory code that pretty much never changes from application to application when you use the documents directory. So we have the function search path for directories in domains. The first argument here is constant ns document directory. Then we have ns user domain mask. And the last boolean, yes. If you'd like an explanation on exactly what all of this means, I encourage you to watch the archiving application data video. But again, this never changes. It's the same every time. So it's not totally important that you understand it as much as it is that you memorize it. So now we have the document directory. And now we're going to actually set the DB path. Okay, so now we got the document directory path, and then we appended on the name of the file, which of course is friends.sql. And so now we have in our instance variable DB path the location, the exact location of where the copy of the friends database that we're going to use should be. So we're now going to create a method that checks to see if there actually is a copy in the documents directory, and if not, create it. Alright, so we're going to make a method here. We're going to call it check database exists. So first we need to create a default file manager object to check that the database exists already, and also, if not, we can use this file manager object to copy the original friends.sql file into the documents directory. So we're going to just create a default file manager. Now, write an if statement. If file manager file exists at path, so we have a simple method here just to see if a file exists at a certain path, db path. We're going to return. So if the friends database has already been copied to the user's documents directory for this application, there's nothing more to do here. This is the check. We've already checked it's there, so we can just stop executing this method. But if that fails and the method doesn't return, we're going to copy this original database into the documents directory. So default, make a string here, default database path equals ns bundle main bundle resource path. So this gives us a path to the main bundle here, which basically is a path to all the resources here we use in the application. And then we want here, actually we need one more here, got one more method to call to here, string by appending path component db name. And so now we have the path to the original copy. Now we're going to copy the original into the to db path, or the documents directory. So file manager copy item at path default database path to path db path error nil. So of course this last parameter here, if you want to pass in an object to be given the error, should there be one, you can do that and then check what the error is afterwards. But we're going to assume that this works. And so now this method is complete. We can save this. Now, because we're going to use this in the future, the next thing we want to do really quickly is make the db path variable here a property of the Light App Delegate class. We're going to need to access this from later on when we create an insert view controller to allow the user to insert a friend into the friend database. We're also going to need the db path so we can open it and execute an insert statement. So we're just going to get that out of the way now and turn that into a property. So underneath the navigation control property call or declaration, new property, read write copy, and a string db path, and save. And of course we need to synthesize this in the .m file. And we can save that. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to actually get into the SQLite coding. So we want to create a method here. We're going to call it grab friends from database. This method is going to open the friends.sql database and then read from it all the friends. But before we do that, we actually need to create a friend object. So we're going to create a subclass of NS object. We're going to call it friend. And the job of this object is simply to act as each individual friend. So for every friend row stored in the friends database, we're going to have one friend object to basically represent that friend in this object-oriented programming environment that we have grown to love in Objective-C. So in this classes folder here, we're going to make a new file. It's going to be a subclass of NSObject, and it's simply going to be called friend. So we've got friend.h and .m. I'm going to move that here to the bottom, and now we're going to set that up. So first we're going to edit the .h file here. We want to give this three properties. One for storing the ID of the friend, one for storing the friend's name, and one for storing the friend's phone number. So now we have our three properties declared. Last thing we need to do in the .h file is we're going to outline a method to use later on to create a new friend object. So rather than create a new friend object and individually set each of these three properties, we're just going to do it all right when we initialize a friend object. So I'm going to make a method called init with ID name and phone number. And so now we'll, instead of initializing a friend object with the init method, we'll initialize it with the init with ID name phone number method. And that way we'll save a few lines of code here. Alright, so now in the .m, we simply need to synthesize our three properties. And then implement our init method here. So if self equals super init, so we're going to do this like you would any custom implementation of an init method. I'm going to set those three properties. So self fid equals I, self name equals n, self dot phone number equals number. Now we actually in the long run didn't save ourselves any lines of coding here because we have to either set the three properties in here or in another method later on, but this way we keep it all contained and compartmentalized in this object here. So later on we just need one line of code to create that friend object, and so kind of separates that and keeps it a little bit more organized and cleaner. And you'll see that later on, and it's definitely going to be something to value when you see how much code it takes to run through the friends database. So now we simply need to return self, and our friend object is complete. So now let's get back over to LiteAppDelegate.m and let's implement the longest method we're probably going to have to implement this entire lesson here, and that is grab friends from database. Now first we're going to want to import friend.h so we can make use of those friend objects. And now implement that big method we've been pushing off until now. Grab friends from database. So I'm going to try to move slowly here and explain each line thoroughly because there's definitely a lot going on here, and if you don't understand each piece separately, it's definitely not going to make sense when it's all put together. So the first thing we need to hear is we need to create a variable here to store a link to the database, and that simply is SQLite 3 and then an asterisk database. So we've got a pointer to an SQLite 3 object, so to speak, and that is the database itself. The database we're going to be accessing, of course, which is the friends database. And now we're going to need somewhere to store all the friends. Once we pull all of these friends or run through all the rows in the database and access all those friends and pull them out and turn them into friend objects, we're going to need somewhere to store those. So where better than an array? So let's go back to the .h file here and make another instance variable, an nsmutable array called friends. This is going to simply be an array to store all of the friend objects. Now let's actually create that friends array, nsmutable array alloc init. Now we get into the heavy SQLite coding. The first thing we want to do here is try to open the connection with the database. So we have a function SQLite3 open. First, it wants the location of the database as a UTF-8 string. So right now we have an NS string, db path, that contains a path to the database in the documents directory. but we're going to call to the UTF-8 string method, which takes an NS string object and converts it to a C car array of characters, or a C string. Second parameter here is going to be a pointer to the database object, so the ampersand and the database. Alright, so now we have this in an if statement because we want to check to make sure that this opening of the database actually goes well, and if not, we don't want to waste time and resources trying to pull all the rows from the friends database. So if this function returns SQLite OK, which is a constant defined in the SQLite library, which means that the database was successfully opened, then we can continue with the rest of our code here. So first thing we need here is we need to make an SQLite statement to use to send to the database to select our friends. So again, if you're familiar with SQL language, which hopefully you are, we have a statement here which we're going to select all the friends with. So select and then an asterisk from friends. So what this means is the asterisk here means grab all rows. I'm sorry, that means grab all fields. The fact that we have no where clause means grab all rows. So we have three fields: the ID field, the name field, and the phone number field. The asterisk here is saying select all three of those fields for any rows that we get that are selected later on. Now we have select all fields from friends. Now the fact that we don't have a where clause, for example, where name equals Anthony Frizzalone, means that every single row will be selected. There's no modifier here. There's no specificity. Every single row, every field, and every row will be selected. So now we have all the information from the friends table, so to speak. Now we need another SQLite type here that is SQLite3 underscore STMT, which is short for statement. I'm going to call this compiled statement. One thing you'll learn to deal with when writing SQLite code is the fact that you need to compile your statements before trying to run them or execute them. Of course, you need to compile any code, but you have to actually do that explicitly here to execute an SQLite statement. So now we're going to have another if statement here. So now we've declared a place to store the compiled statement. So we're going to compile it in this next line of code and store the compiled statement in this variable here, compiled underscore statement. So now another if statement here, again for the same reason as before, to make sure that everything goes okay, and if not, stop the execution. So SQLite prepare v2. The v2 here means version 2. Previously, the original or the earlier version of SQLite, it would have just been SQLite3 underscore prepare. v2 here again is newer version, and basically the differences here are things like speed and efficiency, and a few other things related to error code returning. So you should always use v2. It's the latest version, fastest, most efficient, so up to date, and the one that is receiving support. Anything earlier will be called legacy code, and though you might be able to find support for it, you'll definitely find less. So definitely use the latest version of the library. So be sure to use v2, and in the future, if when v3 eventually comes out, if it does, you'll want to use that also. So the first parameter here is it wants the database. So simply going to plug that in database. Second is the original statement, the uncompiled statement. Next here is if you want to cut off at some point, truncate this uncompiled statement, you can say where in a number of bytes. We don't want to do that. We want the whole statement to be compiled. So we're going to put a -1 there, and that means compile the entire statement. Next here is going to be a pointer to the compiled statement variable, or where to put the compiled statement. So that is our compiled statement variable. And then the last here is going to be null. The last variable, if you happen to put something other than -1 for the third argument here, you would put a pointer to a variable that would store the truncated string or bytes, or the string that wasn't used in compilation. But of course we didn't do that, so we're going to put null here. And then we're going to have the same check. We're going to check to see if this function returns SQLite OK. If so, we're going to move on. Now is when we actually start to get into the code that runs through the friends table. So we need a while loop. Hopefully you've used some kind of SQL querying before, and so you know use a while loop so that each row of the friends table can get its own iteration of the loop. So for each time the database returns a row from the friends table, this while loop will be executed once. So you have a function here, a function for executing any SQLite statement, SQLite3_step. The only parameter is the compiled statement. So now we have a conditional statement here. We're going to see if this SQLite3_step returns SQLite row. So what that means is that when it ran through the next row, or when it ran through the compiled statement again, it saw that there was another row. We haven't finished executing the row. So every time it returns SQLite row, that means we're going to continue. Once it's finished with all the rows and there are no more rows to grab from the database, it's going to return something else, and the while loop will stop executing. So now we've actually gotten to the part where we can do something with this row. So first, we're going to declare an integer here to store the ID of the friend. We have a function SQLite3 column int, and this is for retrieving the value of an integer field of a row in your table. So the first parameter here is going to be the compiled statement. And the second is going to be the index of the field that you're pulling the value from. So earlier we created the table, and the first field was the ID field, so that'll be index 0. So we want the integer value from the first field of the row that we're currently on. So we put a 0 there, and this will return the value of the ID for that particular row. The next is we want a string to store the name of the friend or the row that we're currently running through. So now we need to create an NSString object. So we're going to convert from a UTF-8 string or a C-char string, an array of characters which creates a string. So we have a method NSString string with UTF-8 string, and we're going to typecast here const char. We have another function SQLite3, similar to the other one, the column int function SQLite3_column_text. And as you might imagine, this is for retrieving values of fields that store text, varchar, char, text, blob, anything like that. Again, the first parameter is going to be compiled statement, and the second parameter is going to be the index of the field. So we made the second field name, so we're going to put a 2 and close this method here. And now we've created an NSString object from the original UTF-8 string in the database. Now, last we need to grab the friend's phone number, and it's going to look almost exactly the same as the code directly above, except the index of the field is going to be one higher. I'm sorry, this here should be a 1, and this should be a 2. And now we've read all the information from the database. Now we can create the friend object. So friend new friend equals friend allo, and init with ID, ID will be friend ID, name of course will be friend name, and last here will be friend number. Now I've created our friend object, and let's add that to the friends array. Now we want to do something called finalizing the compiled statement, and this basically means destroying or deleting the compiled statement so as to free up some memory. And then we're going to close the connection to the database. So now our grab friends from database method is complete. Now let's quickly go back to the top here and make sure that these two methods that we just spent a bunch of time on are actually executed right when the application finishes launching. So we need self check database exists and then self grab friends from database. That way, as soon as the application gets going, all of this code that we just wrote here will be executed. Now let's actually list these friends in the table view controller. So we've got our root view controller here, which is already equipped with a table view, but we need to access the delegate's friends array. So we need to make that friends array a property of the light app delegate. So let's do that under here. We're going to use copy and read only. We don't want the original array to be accidentally tampered with, so alright, so now we can go into root view controller and access this friends array and run through it and list each individual friend in the table view. So now we need to do a conversion from a friend object to a graphical representation of that friend object in a row of a table view. So we need to import light-app-delegate.h and the friend.h file. Alright, so now we're going to create an instance variable for the delegate here. So use light at class so the compiler doesn't freak out and say that it's never seen light at delegate before. Call it very simply delegate, and then in view did load, going to set the delegate variable to a pointer of the actual delegate object. So light app delegate UI application shared application delegate. Now we can use this to access the friends array. So delegate. So instead of 0 rows, we're going to return a count for the number of objects in the friends array. Now in this next method here, we're going to set the text labels text to the friend's name. Remember that the friends array stores a bunch of friend objects. So first we're getting the friends array here, and then we're sending a message to the friends array and asking it to give us the object at the row we're currently on, so that'll return a friend object, and then we're sending some name to the friend object, which will of course return the friend's name. So now let's listen and see what we've got so far. Okay, so there you can see that the one row that we inserted earlier in the terminal is in the database, and it's been read and has been displayed in the table view. So now let's make it so that the user can actually add rows to the friends listing. Now let's really quickly use the did select row index path method here and make it so that when a user taps on a row, a little alert view pops up with the ID and the phone number of the user that they selected. So first we need a string for the name, delegate, friends, object at index, index path.row. So again, this returns the friend object that we're dealing with. Next we need the number of the friend selected. And then the ID. So now let's create an alert view to display. UI alert view. Alloc init with title. So title will be friend info. Then we need the message. We're going to use a formatted string for this since we want to plug in users name, number, and ID. So name %@, which will later be replaced by an string object, and then we'll put the ID in parentheses here. So %I for integer, and then we'll make a new line here and put the phone number on the new line. And name FID number. And then delegate nil, we don't care once the user dismisses it. And cancel button, dismiss, and then other button titles will be nil. Sorry, this needs to be cancel button title here. Okay. Now let's display it. Go. And release it. Now let's build it again. And when we tap the row, a little alert view pops up with the name and the stored phone number. Alright. Now let's work on the application and get it to allow users to insert a new friend. So first, we want a button. When pressed, will bring up a new view controller to allow the user to insert a friend. So we need in view did load here to add that bar button item. UI bar button item. Alloc init with bar button system item. UI bar button system item add. So it's a predefined button. It has a simply a plus, and then we need a target, which of course will be self. When the button's pressed, we want the action to be sent to the view controller, and the action we're going to call add friend. And let's also give this a title. Let's build it and make sure that button's there. Okay, so now if we press this, it should crash. So now let's create that new insert view controller for providing the user with an interface to create a new friend. So I'm going to click on friend here and make a new file. I want this to be a UI view controller subclass with a zip for interface. I'm going to call it insert view controller. I'm going to move insert view controller.zip to the resources folder. Now we're going to be doing some SQLite coding in here as well, so we need to also import SQLite 3.h to this header file as well and save that. So now, before we continue with this, let's implement that add friend method that will be executed when the user taps on the plus button. So we need to import insert viewController.h. Insert viewController insert viewController alloc init with nib name insert viewController. That's the name of the zip file we're initializing it with, and we're going to put nil for bundle. When you put nil for the bundle parameter, this method here will default to using the main bundle for the bundle. And now we're going to present this as a model view controller. So we're going to put here self present model view controller iView animated yes, and our add friend method is complete. So just to make sure that this actually does something, let's build it and test it. And so now there's nothing actually in that view, so let's go and create that right now. So let's open up insert viewController.zip. And now here we've got the view that we're going to be working with. So first, I'm going to add a navigation controller up here. It makes it look definitely nicer. I'm going to insert friend. Now we're going to need two text fields here. One to allow the user to enter the new friend's name, and another for the new friend's phone number. So just drag that onto here. I'm going to lower this a little bit. I'm going to go to the attribute inspector and make the placeholder name. I'm going to copy this, paste it, drag down a little bit, and the placeholder for this is going to be phone number. Now, I prefer darker or light gray background, darker than white. White seems a little odd to me, so I'm going to lower this a bit here. Okay, so now we've got our text field set up and the basic interface for the insert friend, and now we need to make this all work. So first, let's make some outlets. Let's go to insert viewController.h. We need two outlets, one for the phone number and one for the name. So outlet UI text field name and IV outlet UI text field number. Now we can connect. Now we need two more actions here. We're going to create a cancel button and a done button. So we need two IB actions, cancel insert and complete insert. Save that. We're going to add some two UI bar button items here. Cancel. And this is going to be a done button. Now we want to set their appropriate methods. Save, and we are about done here. So I'm going to close this and get back into Xcode. Now we can work on our coding. So all we need to do are implement our cancel insert and complete insert method. So we'll take care of cancel insert right away because that's pretty simple. Self dismiss model view control animated yes. Now we need to implement complete insert, the harder of the two. So this will be where we're going to be doing some SQLite coding. We're going to execute an insert query. So first here we need the database, much like last time. We're going to call it database again. Now we need to actually import the lite_app_delegate.h file. We need to do that so that we can grab the path of the database in the documents directory. So delegate equals lite_app_delegate. We're going to typecast as usually do. Application, shared application, delegate, like last time. Now, this time we're going to save some time. We're not going to worry too much about error checking. We did it the first time, so you can see how that's done. This time I'm going to save some time here, try not to make this video too long, and we're just going to run through the code. So we're going to open the connection to the database again, delegate db path utf_h string. So of course we're grabbing the db path property from the delegate and sending the message utf_h string to it to return a utf_h string to pass in here. That's of course the path to the database, and then pointer to the database variable that this is all going to be opened in. Now we need our, as last time, the SQL statement. So here you're going to notice that we're going to have two question marks, and those are basically wildcards, and we're going to bind some values to those later. So insert into friends, name, phone number. We're going to let auto increment take care of the ID, values. Let me put two question marks. And these question marks are going to be replaced with actual values in a bit here. We're going to use bind function, SQLite bind functions, to bind values to each question mark. Now we need to prepare the SQLite statement, but we need an SQLite statement variable. So SQLite 3 statement add friend compiled. Now we're going to prepare, same as last time. So the first parameter will be the database. Second, the original uncompiled statement. -1 since we don't want it to truncate. Pointer to add friend compiled. And no. Now, when you're dealing with SQLite, you have to, again, as we mentioned earlier, compile the SQL statement before you execute it. And if you're executing the same statement multiple times, as you expect might happen here, it's definitely good to make the compiled statement a static variable so that you only have to compile it once and do something like if add friend compiled equals no, then compile, you prepare. But here we didn't do that. We didn't make this static, which of course means that you declare it once and then it becomes a global variable in this file. We didn't do that because there's actually a glitch that you'll see later on that the only way to fix is to recompile this insert statement every single time. But again, I'll explain why we're compiling every time, and if this doesn't apply to what you're doing, then I definitely suggest making the compiled statement static, and then you can use a function SQLite3 reset on the compiled statement, and that will erase the binded values, and then you can use it again later. So it's definitely good to only compile once. It definitely good saves CPU power and makes the application run a little bit faster. So the next thing we want to do here is bind or replace those wildcards. We have a function here, SQLite3 bind text. So first is the compile statement the binding is going to be done to. Second is the wildcard number. So we have two wildcards. we're going to replace the first one, so we put a 1 here. Then the value to replace it with, name text UTF-8 string. The next parameter here, I'm going to put -1 for, and this is supposed to be the number of bytes of the value. If you don't put a -1, the function will take care of figuring out the number of bytes for the value you're putting in. And the last parameter here, we're going to put a constant SQLite static. Now, depending on what you put in this last one, a few things can happen. The last one normally takes a pointer to a destructor method, meaning a method for freeing up or destroying the variable where the value you're binding the text is being stored. Now, we're using a constant here, SQLite static, and what that means is we're telling the function not to worry about destroying or freeing up the memory for the value being put in here. As you can see here, we're grabbing this directly from the text field, so we don't have to worry about that. As the text property, we don't want to be erased. That kind of needs to stay. So we plug in SQLite static, and it basically ignores it. If you plug in the constant SQLite underscore transient, the function will make a copy of the string being passed in and use that, and then free the space up where that variable is being stored after it's done executing or inserting into the database. So we're going to repeat this process and bind to the second wildcard 2 here. This is going to be the number, and then the next 2 are going to be the same. Now we're going to use SQLite 3 step to execute the compiled statement. And then we're going to use finalize on it to erase the compiled statement. And then close the database. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it's good to make your compiled statement a static variable so you can reuse it and not have to recompile every time. And instead of using finalize, reset. And what that will do is that'll erase the bound values and put back the wildcards, and you can bind again later on. Now I happen to know that this is going to crash, and when I first started working with SQLite, it took me a while to figure out why this was happening, but we'll let it crash and then I'll explain exactly why. Alright, so I'm going to type in John Doe for the name, and now when choosing the phone number text field, we'd like for a keypad to come up, which we can change easily in Interface Builder in a minute, but I'm on a MacBook, so I don't need to do that just yet. And you can see that it did crash. So let's take a look at what line is causing the crash. So it's this line here, trying to access the DB path property. And so it took me a while to figure this out, because at first glance there's nothing wrong with the DB path property. It's like any other property call. It is set to be read-write, so it's definitely readable. But for some reason it can't be used. Once we get to the insert view controller, trying to use it is causing some kind of crash. The reason is it's actually been corrupted. Now, if we take a look at lightup.delegate.m, you can see right here, this is when dbpath is used. For some reason, the combination of using SQLite 3 open and the UTF-8 string method is causing the dbpath instance variable to be corrupted in some way. I'm not sure how, but it is causing some kind of corruption. So the fix here is to simply make a copy of it before giving it to the SQLite open function. So now let's save this and build it again. Okay, so it worked that time. Press cancel now. We haven't made this to update yet, so let's just close the app and make sure that it actually did get inserted into the database. And there you can see John Doe has been inserted. Okay. So now let's make it so that when the insert has completed, the main table view is actually updated with the new friend. So let's go to insert viewcontroller.m, make some changes here. So first we need to make a new friend object so we can add that to the delegates friends array. So we're going to allocate and initialize a new friend object like we did earlier. Now we need to actually get the ID. There's a great function for SQLite called SQLite last insert ID, or last insert row ID. And its function or purpose is simply to insert the last auto increment ID of the row that was last created. We have these IDs that automatically increment by 1 each time a new row is added, and we want the ID of the last inserted row to save in this new friend object. So pretty easily we need to typecast as an int because this function actually returns a 64-bit integer, and we're using a 16-bit or a default sized integer in this friend object, so we're going to typecast as an int, and then SQLite 3 last insert row ID and then database. So it takes the database that the insert was executed on. Now the reason that we're recompiling every time is this here. There's some glitch that the last insert row ID function returns the last ID the first time, but every subsequent time that you execute an insert query, if you don't recompile the insert statement, it returns 0. So it's just a weird bug that has not been fixed yet. So for now we need to recompile every time, but if that gets fixed in the future and you need to use this function, then you can avoid recompiling every time and save some computer resources and make your application a tad bit faster. Okay, the name is going to be simply name.text, and the phone number is going to be number.text. Now let's add this to the friends array. And then make this model view controller, this insert view controller disappear. So dismiss model view controller animated yes. And before we're done here, we need to run right back over to the top and import the friend.h file. We never actually did that earlier. This way we don't get any errors when we try to build, since we actually did use the friend object down here. And now we need to go to root viewcontroller.m, and in the view will appear method right here, we're going to want to reload the table view so it refreshes and displays that new friend. So self table view reload data. Even give it a shot. Okay, so let's press the plus here and see. I'll just type in here Jason Williams and phone number 223344566. And there we have it. As we'd hoped, the modal view controller is dismissed. Jason Williams is added as a new row. The table view refreshes, and when we press it, the correct information pops up here. And of course, if we quit and reopen, the information is all there. So really quickly, let's just open insert view controller and change the keys for the phone number text field to a number pad. So having the attribute inspector here, we have a keyboard drop down, and we can choose number pad. And then we can save this and close it. And now let's build one last time. So if we press the plus here, you see we get a regular pad for the name, so we'll just type in Anthony again, and then phone number, we got a phone pad this time, as we had hoped. Well, that sums up the SQLite tutorial. I hope you learned a lot, and I hope you tune into future lessons. Thank you very much for watching.